Hello, hello. All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. We're going to get this show started so we can get some of these high school kids back so they can finish studying. I'm Ryan Law, the president of the Wisconsin Forum, and I'd like to thank you all for coming out this evening. Really appreciate it. And we have a very special guest this evening. I see some first-timers here. I see some new members, and I see some old members. Can we get the volume switched down a little bit on this speaker? I'll continue anyway, but we'll try to get that down. It is a little loud. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming. This is our first event for the year. We have 4 more events after this, and I'd love to see you all there. Invite people. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker. Matthew Kibbe. Matt is the co-founder and president at Free the People, an educational foundation which uses cutting-edge technology, video production, and good storytelling in order to turn on the next generation to the values of liberty and cooperation. Matt's a distinguished senior fellow at the Austrian Economic Center in Vienna, who in 2015 served as senior advisor to a Rand Paul super PAC, and in 2016 created an alternative PAC to support liberty candidates. Dubbed the Scribe by the New York Daily News, Kibbe is most recently author of the #2 New York Times bestseller, Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff, a Libertarian Manifesto. There are a few copies that we do have here. If you'd like to talk to him about getting one signed, I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. So let's give Matt a warm Wisconsin Forum welcome.
Okay, one of the provisions in my contract is that I don't have to speak behind a podium. And this started, I'm actually triggered by podiums. I was speaking in Belgrade, Serbia, a couple years ago at a Soviet bloc university, and I noticed that in the former Soviet Union, these old universities have these massive podiums. They actually look like a tank, and they go all the way across the lectern. And I could just imagine how it worked, where the Marxist professor was behind the podium, which is always raised above the audience, and he's banging on the podium sort of Khrushchev style, telling you what to think. And I realized that when you stand behind a podium, your voice is a little bit deeper, and you sound smarter. But if you come out here, you're just a guy, right? You're just a guy with ideas, and you're subject to the criticism and the alternative ideas that the audience have. And I was thinking to myself, we believe in the wisdom of crowds, right? We don't believe in top-down, we believe in bottom-up. So ever since that day, I have refused to speak behind a podium, because you're kind of hiding, you're cheating, you're telling people things and they don't have an opportunity to respond to you. So tonight, if you forgive me, I'm not going to use a podium because it triggers me. Speaking of triggered, I was driving into your beautiful city yesterday, and I drive past a coffee shop. Maybe you guys know it. It's called Collectivo. Big freaking red letters across the front of it, Collectivo. And I Googled them today because this triggered me as well. And I'm hoping that they don't mean what I think they mean when they say Collectivo, because Collectivos in socialist Venezuela today are the privatized gangs that impose the violence that Nicolas Maduro needs to use to keep the people under check. These are the Collectivos of the motorcycle gangs that travel Venezuela, particularly in the villages, to terrorize people that are trying to take to the streets because they're freaking starving to death. And so I get to Milwaukee, and I'm sure if I went inside, I didn't go inside because I was triggered, but I'm sure if I went inside, I could spend like $5, $6, $7 for a double espresso, pulled with great care by some dude with a man bun, not having any understanding of the context for which his coffee company perhaps named their name. And I want to talk about that a little bit tonight, because there seems to be a fundamental disconnect between people in this country, particularly young people, that think that socialism is cool, and the practical implications of socialism in history and socialism in practice. And you guys probably noticed that Jim Carrey was on the Bill Maher show the other night, and he very bravely said, correct me if I get the quote wrong, but he's like, we have to say the word. We have to say what we're for. We're for socialism. And I'm wondering to myself, when the other side says these words, do they know what they mean, and do we understand what they're trying to say when they do that? Well, let me take a step back for a second. A couple months ago, I convinced a friend of mine, Lee Schooland, to finally go on camera and tell her personal story. Lee Schooland was born in China in 1958. Students of history will remember 1958 as the beginning of Mao's Great Leap Forward, the great experiment in socialism that was going to take China from this backward agrarian village economy where there was private property, there were local villages and local farmers that created the food that people would eat. But Mao didn't want to do that. Before 1958, he decided, as a student of Marxism and communism, that it would be better to socialize the land, because it wasn't productive enough. Clearly there could be a better way to do this. If only there was some organization, if only there was some planning, if only there was a national purpose to our production, things could get better. So leading up to 1958, Mao and the Communist Party started to socialize the lands. Lee Schooland is born in 1958, and after what I recall being 52 weeks, she's 52 weeks old, she's removed from her family, she's removed from her parents and put into a government school, 52 weeks. And she is taught systematically from that day forward that families don't matter, that your devotion, your love, the thing that matters to you as a Chinese citizen, as a socialist, is the state, is Mao, is the greater purpose. That families corrupt, because families are all about making sure that that unit is okay, making sure that they are fed, making sure that they're more and more prosperous. If they work hard, their children will have a better future. And that undermines the purpose of what Mao is trying to do. So she is removed from her family, and as it turns out, her family was what was characterized during the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward as a black family. A black family, as opposed to a red family, was suspicious. They were not on board completely, unquestioningly, with the socialist experiment. So they were ridiculed by their neighbors. They were targeted by the government. They were sometimes forced to go to labor camps to be re-educated. And this was Lee's life. She didn't know any other life. She told a couple stories about her life as a child that I want to share with you. But the first one was they had no food. And some of you who know about the Great Leap Forward know about the aggregate economic consequences of what Mao set out to do. He was jealous of the United Kingdom, he was jealous of the United States, and he felt that China was his backward economy because they didn't have a central plan, they didn't have this national purpose. So his idea was to take farmers and have them produce steel. Because how do you become a big industrialized nation? You make steel. Back to Lee Schoolin's story, one of her jobs as a small child was to gather pots and pans and doorknobs, hose, anything that was made of metal that could be smelted down in these very primitive fire things that Mao insisted that all of these farmers create. Took all the metal and smelted it into what turned out to be worthless pig iron, because none of them, shockingly, no farmers had any sense of metallurgy. Mao was a poet. He didn't know anything about that. But he had the tenacity, the temerity, the arrogance, the fatal conceit to think that he could redesign an agricultural economy from the top down and fast forward China into this beautiful industrial era. Well, what happens when you have all of your farmers leave the fields to make steel? Crops go untended, food is not produced, mass starvation ensues. There's a book called Democide, which is a book about chronicling the purposeful acts by government of mass murder. Not wars. Wars are not included in democide. Democide is when the government decides that in order to retain power, in order to achieve whatever their mission is as a government, they're going to kill a lot of people in the process. China is at the top of the list. The Great Leap Forward is at the top of this list. Estimates go anywhere from 25 million to 50 plus million people who starved to death or were slaughtered because they refused to cooperate during the Great Leap Forward. It's impossible for Americans to even conceive of what that means. We have no idea. We cannot even comprehend why a government would do that, what that does to families. But Lee Schoolin lived through that. A couple stories she told me that give you a sense for the arrogance. One of the things that Mao did, and you can wiki this and read it for yourself. The great thing about the Chinese experiment in socialism is they aggressively documented all of the profoundly stupid and evil things that they did. So there's footage, and there's all sorts of data. But Mao decided that one of the reasons they couldn't produce as much food was not socialism. One of the reasons was there were too many birds. Does anyone know this story? Mao launched a national campaign primarily implemented by young people that are 6, 7 years old, to kill all of the birds because the birds were eating the crops. And there's archival footage that we've included in one of our videos of wheelbarrows and trucks full of dead sparrows. And it worked. They killed all the birds. The next year, the locusts ate the rest of the crops. So there was no food. Another interesting story and remember, she is with a black family that has been sent off to work for the greater good. So she killed sparrows because that was her patriotic duty. She also was assigned to turn a river. Rivers go like this, right? Rivers go the way that God intended them to do based on geography and all that stuff. And Mao decided that a crooked river was inefficient. It's taking up too much land. So her job was to dig a straight river, like all day. And they have no food, right? So people are dying while they're doing this. And once they launched the new river, there's all this celebration, the great state of China and the socialist mission has been achieved. And unknowing to them, they had dug the new river in a porous ground that immediately sucked up all the water. So there's locusts, there's no seed grain, there's no farmers, now there's no water. So if you wonder how you want to kill 50 million people in 3 or 4 years, all it takes is an insane amount of arrogance in replacing the local wisdom of crowds, the farmers that know how to farm, the steel makers that know how to make steel, the businessmen that know how to figure out supply and demand and things that people do. Replace that with a central plan and someone arrogant enough to think that they can do that, and it could be an unspeakable disaster. Now, nobody in this country knows the story. The documentation of the tragedies involved with Mao's China really didn't come to public light until some Chinese dissidents started smuggling them at risk of death out of the country in the 1990s. But if you dig into the history of socialism in practice, you will find a similar story again and again and again. It started perhaps with Lenin's experiment in the Bolshevik Revolution. Between Lenin and Stalin, he killed about 65 million people. A lot of them starved to death because socialism doesn't work in practice, but a lot of them died in the process of Lenin and Stalin trying to enforce their power. Anne Applebaum, who's a very interesting historian and reporter, she wrote a book a couple years ago about Stalin right now, but she had this really interesting thesis which upset all of the intellectuals who believe that socialism has never really been tried. You guys ever heard this argument? Venezuela, that's not socialism. That's something else. Soviet Union, that was not socialism. That was state capitalism. Her argument about Joseph Stalin, who arguably is the most effective mass murderer in the history of the world, was that contrary to the arguments of the left, who argued that the reason that socialism didn't work in the Soviet Union was that Stalin was a sociopath, he was a psychopath. He would kill anybody for any reason. And her argument, which I tend to agree with, is that no, he just had a blank check. He had all the power that he needed to do whatever he needed to do to hold on to his power. And there's a fundamental critique of socialism that comes from some of the economists that I've grown to learn from and understand. Frederick Hayek writes about this in The Road to Serfdom, how badder people are drawn to positions of power in government because they dig power. But of course, Lord Acton said that all of us are corrupted by power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Imagine a scenario, let's talk about Nicolas Maduro for a second. Imagine a scenario where all of your high-minded ideas about socialism, heck, Nicolas Maduro even brought in a Marxist professor from Spain, one of the best guys. He called him the Jesus Christ of economics, which is a pretty loaded term if you think about it. Jesus Christ knew a lot of things that maybe you and I didn't know, but if you could get a socialist economist that knew everything, you could do some really cool stuff in Venezuela. He was the architect of the idea that we're going to put a fence between Venezuela and Colombia as moms are trying to get food for their kids, because the problem was not the lack of production or the corruption of the currency or the lack of private property. The problem was the rest of the world was trying to corrupt this beautiful experiment in Venezuela. So we just cut that off at the border. Suddenly things are going to start to work. That was Nicolas Maduro. But everyone says, that's not socialism, man. That's state capitalism. That's oligarchy. every time I publish one of my videos, some young person complains that I'm unfairly characterizing these ideals of socialism. So what do we do with that? Like it seems like there's a fundamental disconnect, because I get it. Like if you're young and you went to a normal high school or a normal university, no one's going to tell you these stories. You can Google it. You can see that almost everything I just told you is probably true. But they deny it, and they deny it, and they deny it. And our side is over here saying, guys, free markets and capitalism and supply and demand and people figuring stuff out from the bottom up, it's the only way to prevent these things from happening. But my sense is we're not hearing each other. We're yelling at each other, and we're calling those guys socialists, and they're calling us oligarchs and capitalists. What does Bernie Sanders calls us? The billionaires, world billionaires, by the way. Which would be kind of cool. So part of my theory is that the disconnect here goes way back to when I was in grade school. When I was in grade school, I was taught that there was a political spectrum that went left to right. And on the one side, on the right, the horrible far right, you get all of these vicious, nativist, racists, and ultimately genocidal ideologies, fascism, Nazism. Maybe Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe he's kind of a fascist. And that's really bad stuff. We hate them. How many classical liberals? How many communists? There's one there. There's a communist in the room.
I'm kidding.
Okay, who voted for Hillary? It's cool. Anybody vote for Bernie, seriously? When I speak to young people at young libertarian things, there's always a former Bernie bro who was turned on to his sort of anti-establishment, rage against the machine kind of thing, and frankly his authenticity. He's been the same guy for about 1,000 years, like he and Yoda went to school together 800 years ago. People like that. I forget what I was saying now. The project that we have, I don't think it's political. I know a lot of people here probably work on political campaigns and they probably care passionately about outcomes, and those outcomes matter. It's not partisan. I don't even think it's ideological. I think we should be thinking bigger and bigger than we ever have in the past. I'm old enough to remember when libertarians got together when I was a kid. It was a little bit like Hayek at the peak of Montpelier and hiding with 12 of his friends. There just weren't that many of us. And we were afraid to tell anybody outside of our group who we were and what we believed. And then we got bigger. And then there was Ron Paul, and then there was the Tea Party, and then there was all this other stuff. And we became a substantial block of people with a generally shared set of values. We're not big enough yet. Our problem is our audience is too big. We don't know how to talk to tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people who are out there on social media searching for alternative ways to view the world. They don't like the choices that top-down that they're trying to impose on them. And we gotta go get those guys. And we do it the way that I think the left has done so effectively. We tell stories. We go find Lee Schooland, and if I want to tell anybody about Mao's China, I'm not going to quote the statistics, I'm not going to quote the data, I'm not going to tell you all the horrible facts and figures. I want Lee to tell her story, because she was there. And she could tell a story about her family. She can tell a story about her brother eating rats so he wouldn't starve. We could do that on healthcare. We could do that on any issue that we all care about. But we got to kind of ditch the spreadsheets for a while and ditch the downward sloping demand curves and tell stories in the way that people consume information. One of the ways we've tried to do that is through video, because It's one thing to talk to a full audience of people, but a good video, you can reach 10 million people, 100 million people. Marginal cost per connection goes down and down and down. In this decentralized world, why can't we win in that world? This is our model. We believe in the wisdom of crowds. We believe in decentralization. We believe in not telling people what to do, but that given the chance, they will find good ideas and better opportunities and ways to solve problems. We can win this thing. But we got to be willing to sort of shake things up, acknowledge that we're not done yet, and start listening to some of the people that think right now that democratic socialism is cool. Thank you guys so much.
He's going to get some water, but we're going to do some Q&A when he comes back up here. And then after a little Q&A, we will break for just a few minutes to let the high school kids get home by their bedtimes. And then after that, if anyone wants to stay afterwards, we will still have Matt around if you'd like to talk to him.
By the way, my bedtime's before theirs. I guarantee you that that's true. Does anybody have a question?
Yes. Well, more of a comment. You gave a dichotomy of choices there between Nazis and socialists. Nazi is National Socialist Workers' Party.
Right.
What choice is there between those two?
Right.
They're one and the same except for a racial aspect to it,
Right.
to Germany. And I forgot what the other one is.
So the rest of that story, by the way, is that the political spectrum does not go from left to right. It goes from bottom to top. And on the bottom is all these deadly isms, all of these flavors of authoritarianism. And in practice, like everyone has this sort of intellectual difference between fascism, which is about, it's about pursuing this mythical, non-existent greatness of a nation kind of past. And Hitler had that, and Mussolini had that. But by the way, Pol Pot, Marxist trained in Paris, he had it too. So I don't think they're that different. I think it's all different flavors of the same thing. So as you work your way up, you get in the middle of what Ludwig von Mises called interventionism, and there's 1,000 flavors of that. And interventionism can do some really bad things, but at least it's not mass killing people. But somewhere you get to cooperation. You get to voluntary association. I was giving a talk once, and a young progressive woman asked me, and libertarians love to make a joke about this, she basically said, but who will build the roads? Who will provide health care? And when you think about your daily life, almost everything we do and every problem we solve is solved without a rule or regulation or program or plan or dictate. It's just stuff that people figured out how to do. And that goes back hundreds of years. I mean, Hayek has talked about the evolution of the rules that make for a civil society. Those were not planned. Those were not enshrined in some constitutional document. They were people figuring out over a long process of time that, you know what, if I stop killing my neighbor, maybe they'll stop killing me too. Vernon Smith, who's a Nobel Prize winner, has gamified this. He's created these games that are designed to make people ultimately screw each other over, but every time he runs the game, once they try to screw each other over and everybody mutually destructs, they start cooperating. They start solving problems, and they achieve these inarticulate rules that allow for people to work together. That's the world we live in. You drive on a certain side of the road not because it's a law, but because it's a bad idea to drive on the other side. Someone figured that out before you did. You're just following the rule. That's the kind of stuff we need to explain at the top of the pyramid. There's beautiful stuff up there. There's stuff that allow people to create a triple IPA that is so hoppy that it will melt your face off. That was not a government program. It's too delicious to have government involved in it at all. But I go on too long. Yes, sir.
With today's mass media is pounding in all different directions, if you had to have a bullet point or a talking point why socialism kills or why it's bad, what would it be?
So I would lead with the positive and not the negative, and Socialism Kills was the hashtag that I used for an infinite number of videos. My preferred hashtag, which is the tweet that Adam Smith would have done if Twitter was around when he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, was don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. People should be free to live their lives and pursue their dreams as long as they don't hurt people or take their stuff.
That's good.
And by the way, I stole that from your mom, and she probably stole it from your grandmother. And that's that common sort of golden rule, kind of rule that Hayek writes about, that was not designed by anyone, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I think, when I say that to young progressive audience, by the way, they've never heard the word libertarian before. They don't even know what it is. And when you describe it that way, they're like, I'm going to be a libertarian. I once converted a senior official at the ACLU, and she was devastated because it was probably going to affect her career in horrible ways, so she had to whisper it to me. I think I might be a libertarian. All the way back there.
Would one of the bullet points be pointing out constantly that on the left of the socialists or collectivists, that they believe that human nature is by basically good, and all you have to do is talk about bureaucrats like us or people against that. And Elizabeth Warren envisions, I think, that people like her will be running on very good, serve people, not George Stalin, or good migrate direction.
Yeah, and that's why Anne Applebaum's critique was so important, because she argued that everybody would turn into that person. By the way, progressivism is less benign than that. The progressive ideology does not say that everybody's good. It says that certain elites who went to the right universities and came from the right families and had the right pedigree, those are the people that can be trusted with that much power. So it's a very arrogant, elitist attitude that modern progressivism had going into it. And that's morphed into sort of a communitarian democracy can solve all our problems kind of a thing. But yeah, there are bad people out there. But the point of decentralizing power is that anybody can be bad. The point of Hayek's critique is that nobody's smart enough. Hillary Clinton's probably smarter than Donald Trump, but that doesn't make her a better chief executive. God help us. There's a question over here.
I view you as an outstanding economist, yet it seems your stronger strength is even communication. But preaching to us doesn't seem to get us where we need to go. We need to figure out, we, the ones that want liberty, need to figure out how to change the system. And I think the system is cranking out socialists. And I'm talking about the education system. So what would you say as an economist and a great communicator that we can do to either go around the education system or revamp it?
So I think we go around. I think top-down education is suffering the same fate that the 3 TV networks suffered a while ago, that the 2 political parties are suffering, that top-down corporations are freaking out because they no longer have this ability to dominate the marketplace the way they used to. I was going to quote the Grateful Dead because I always quote the Grateful Dead. A guy that just passed away, John Perry Barlow, was a lyricist for the Grateful Dead. He also started a libertarian cyber tech thing called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He go look at one of his TED Talks sometime. He talks about the right to know. And he talks about the incredibly liberating aspects of social media. You're seeing this very much manifested itself on YouTube right now, where young people are creating their own curriculum. That is the death knell to establishing education. And, you know, guys like Peter Thiel even argue don't even go to college anymore. I would hate to be a parent thinking about whether or not to send someone to school today because the cost benefit's just not there. I'm going to spend $100,000 for that, and then my kid's not going to get a job anyway because the degree's not worth anything. I think and this is what I'm saying, is we shouldn't be talking to each other in this room. I want you guys to go talk to somebody who's not one of us. And one way that I've found to do that is through social media. But not the rage bait that we do today where you know, we call the other guy an a-hole and then go home. Listen first. And go watch the Ocasio-Cortez video. And instead of saying, man, I hate her, she's a socialist, just listen to why her message was resonant with people. And maybe learn something from that, because I think we have a better, compelling, humanitarian, uplifting, community-based story to tell. And don't worry about high school, don't worry about college, but you guys that are in high school, stay in high school, please. All right.
Personally, Matt, maybe you got some suggestions for me. I'm personally really frustrated because I couldn't agree more with that bank bailout. It's just an absolute disaster. I was shouting at the Republicans at the time. We had Republicans with full steam ahead of them. And I'm not hearing any Republican leaders come back and say that that was wrong. And yet, how do you get a libertarian in office? It is so frustrating.
Yeah, so I was at a group called Freedom Works during the Wall Street bailout, and actually wrote an article for Reason Magazine called "What Would Mises Do?" And I joke about the fact that in Washington, D.C., the so-called libertarians and conservatives, there was about a dozen of us that opposed the bailout. Everybody was in the tank because it was a Republican proposal that had to be done. Wall Street, Republicans, the conservative community, they're all in the tank. That's why I don't want to go to Washington. I don't want to try to convince insiders that they're doing the wrong thing. We got to do an end run. If you want to do an end run around education, do an end run around the political establishment as well, and talk directly to people. There's a lot of common ground here on that question. Left, right, libertarian. Real people don't like Wall Street bailouts. Insiders like Wall Street bailouts. And they had that closed system, but you remember the uprising that we eventually called the Tea Party, it started with the Wall Street bailout. It didn't start with Barack Obama's election. And everyone ignores that because everybody's hands in Washington are dirty. They all voted for that thing. There was a question. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one. You were going through liberals and conservatives and this type of thing. Popular phrase we've run for a few years recently is I am socially liberal, fiscally conservative.
Yeah.
There is no part of that. However, I would assume 90% of people are.
Is anyone here a big L Libertarian Party guy? I'm not trying to start a fight. So there's an interesting fight going on in the Big L Libertarian Party. I've never been a Big L Libertarian because they spend so much time trying to destroy each other. It seemed sort of frustrating. But there is a fight between socially conservative libertarians and sort of the Gary Johnson wing. And Gary Johnson, as you may know, ran, even though he had a very pro-life record as governor, he ran as a social liberal. Very explicit about it. I think it was a strategy. And my point, as a libertarian who lives a fairly conservative life, is that the whole point of our view is that politics shouldn't be. How many classical liberals? How many communists? There's one there. There's a communist in the room.
I'm kidding.
Okay, who voted for Hillary? It's cool. Anybody vote for Bernie, seriously? When I speak to young people at young libertarian things, there's always a former Bernie bro who was turned on to his sort of anti-establishment, rage against the machine kind of thing, and frankly his authenticity. He's been the same guy for about 1,000 years, like he and Yoda went to school together 800 years ago. People like that. I forget what I was saying now. The project that we have, I don't think it's political. I know a lot of people here probably work on political campaigns and they probably care passionately about outcomes, and those outcomes matter. It's not partisan. I don't even think it's ideological. I think we should be thinking bigger and bigger than we ever have in the past. I'm old enough to remember when libertarians got together when I was a kid. It was a little bit like Hayek at the peak of Mont Pelerin hiding with 12 of his friends. There just weren't that many of us. And we were afraid to tell anybody outside of our group who we were and what we believed. And then we got bigger. And then there was Ron Paul, and then there was the Tea Party, and then there was all this other stuff. And we became a substantial block of people with a generally shared set of values. We're not big enough yet. Our problem is our audience is too big. We don't know how to talk to tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people who are out there on social media searching for alternative ways to view the world. They don't like the choices that top-down that they're trying to impose on them. And we gotta go get those guys. And we do it the way that I think the left has done so effectively. We tell stories. We go find Lee Schooland, and if I want to tell anybody about Mao's China, I'm not going to quote the statistics, I'm not going to quote the data, I'm not going to tell you all the horrible facts and figures. I want Lee to tell her story, because she was there. And she could tell a story about her family. She can tell a story about her brother eating rats so he wouldn't starve. We could do that on healthcare. We could do that on any issue that we all care about. But we got to kind of ditch the spreadsheets for a while and ditch the downward sloping demand curves and tell stories in the way that people consume information. One of the ways we've tried to do that is through video, because it's one thing to talk to a full audience of people, but a good video, you can reach 10 million people, 100 million people. Marginal cost per connection goes down and down and down. In this decentralized world, why can't we win in that world? This is our model. We believe in the wisdom of crowds. We believe in decentralization. We believe in not telling people what to do, but that given the chance, they will find good ideas and better opportunities and ways to solve problems. We can win this thing. But we got to be willing to sort of shake things up, acknowledge that we're not done yet, and start listening to some of the people that think right now that democratic socialism is cool. Thank you guys so much.